Arcade Heroes.
Greetings, it's Adam with Arcade Heroes. Back with an addendum to the video I did yesterday talking about why I closed my second location. And this is in response to a comment that popped up last night on that video. It's a fair criticism, and it came from one John Jacob Jingleheimer. And he or she said, "Only 6 months after the arcades aren't dying video, would you change anything in that video now?" And so, again, fair point. I mean, if I'm the arcade hero, Mr. Arcade Hero, and I had a arcade failure, does that mean all arcades are doomed, as I'm constantly told? Now, the obvious answer will be no, but I'll lay out why there isn't anything I would change about that, and the closure of my single location has nothing to do with the industry at large. And I've always found this to be kind of a bizarre argument, and you'll see it pop up anytime there is a major news of a closure happening out there, particularly with Japanese arcades. A lot of the comments, it doesn't matter which social media site it is, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc., there will always be comments saying arcades are dead, arcades are dying. And this is just more evidence, but that's confirmation bias. People who are already convinced that they're dead and they're going to die. But it is annoying as somebody fighting for arcades and their good name to come across, because it's not taking into account all the factors that affect running a business, and we're talking about any business here. Now, it's most common with arcades that there has to be context there as to why they're closing. Some arcades may close down just because the landlord decides to get greedy, or they don't want them there anymore, and so they shut it down. There was that, I think it was called Kawasaki Warehouse or something like that over in Asia. I think it was Japan. That was an amazing looking location, but eventually the landlords didn't want them there anymore, and they forced them out. And I've read about many different arcades out there where the landlord was a major issue, and it wasn't anything to do with the arcade. The arcade was making money, but for some reason, maybe it's greed, where they just want more in rent, or they just don't like what goes on there, or who knows. It can be forced out. And so context is really, really important. It certainly matters when it comes to whether a business lives or dies or thrives. And so to provide some context to why I closed, and something that I should have brought up within that other video that I forgot about until its comment popped up, was and the background that I have here, this is from the now closed Ogden location. But if you were to pick up a book about business, entrepreneurship, or take a class, chances are that there will be an emphasis, if you're doing a retail style business that people need to go into, obviously not an online one, but any retail business will hear location, location, location. And now, again, that isn't as important as it used to be, just because of so many things can be done online these days. But for a business like an arcade, location really matters. That's very, very important, because arcades thrive off of foot traffic. If you're in a high foot traffic location, then chances are you are going to see lots of business. Now, I did point out in that video that there was one day that I had last year, September 26th, I think it was, where I'd had only a couple of customers throughout most of the day. And in that video, which I'm putting up here, you could see that the hallways of the Newgate Mall were dead. And so there wasn't always good foot traffic at that mall. Now, the problem with location, 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 at least when you hear it in a class, is sometimes they don't really tell you, well, how do you know? How do you figure out what's the best location? Now, malls just seem to inherently are supposed to be good, but that's not a guarantee, especially in more modern times where fewer people have been going to malls. In fact, if you do a quick internet search, you'll find that malls have been in trouble for a while, for years. And as more big box retailers have closed their doors, those are often were called anchor stores because they were real acres for the business storms or the economic storms that could come and go, and they would bring people into the mall. And as they closed, people started going away. In the Valley Fair Mall, where I'm currently at, I saw that happen quite vividly when Macy's closed down. Even though my business has nothing to do with clothing, I noticed a drop in earnings. And the same thing, well, I got into this mall before, or after, Mervyn's had closed. But Mervyn's was another big acre retailer. Now, there's a movie theater in their place these days. But still, that was something that used to bring business into the mall, and it's gone. And so the landscape of retail has changed drastically due to online competition. And as I mentioned in that video, what a lot of malls have done to compensate is fill up these big box places with things like family entertainment centers. But what does that all have to do with the context of why I closed Ogden? And so there was a Sears there, and that was closed, so they lacked that big retailer. They had a Dillard's, which was open, but their hours weren't always consistent. Oftentimes they were opening a little later at like 11, but they would always close sooner, I believe, too. And I think that's also what affected when I would see some foot traffic in the mall. And I also already got into that as to the hours being an issue. But one thing that I did fail to mention in that video was the very high tenant turnover that I saw in the mall. And so throughout Newgate Mall, now I didn't track this precisely, but I would occasionally walk through the mall, and I would notice that there were certain shops that had been there when I first had started myself, and then they were gone. And it was a lot more than I've ever seen in West Valley at the Valley Fair Mall. And I saw there was one called Lisa's Popcorn, where there was a lady doing deluxe popcorn, and that was her second location, I believe. She closed that down after a few months, or maybe a year after I had come in. There was a barber shop which moved around a few times, and I think they ultimately closed. There was this odd furniture store. Maybe it's a chain. I can't remember its name. Down Home something, again, I can't remember, but they mostly sold furniture, but they had a huge space. They closed down but were replaced with something else that didn't make a lot of sense to me. Just seemed like a bunch of odd and ends, almost like a dollar store. There were several clothing stores that closed while I had been there. And again, I was only in the Newgate Mall for 2 years. And there was some place that sold like Native American style clothing, ponchos, and things, where they only lasted a few months. There was a Japanese food restaurant in the food court which closed down, and actually ever since I had gone into Newgate, and even when I ended up closing, there was one space there that was for a restaurant to come in that they never were able to fill. And I also mentioned in the video there was Rooster's Fun Unlimited, a game store. They would sell games used, new, from anything from the old Atari 2600 to the PS5. They also had a few arcade machines in the back of their store, and that they had been in the mall for years, for a much longer time than I had been. And as I was moving equipment out the other day, I went over to see if they had some Ziploc bags so we could store some screws. But in talking with them, I was told that they are closing down. And then I noticed the sign. They had a big sign saying we are closing as of March 31st. And so even a game store there is closing down. And so why is it that this particular mall has such high turnover? Well, again, I think it comes back to just the general foot traffic has not been great in there. Now, I don't blame the mall management. They actually are, the mall management and the mall owners are two different things. And in fact, the Newgate Mall was sold, I think it was last year. It might have been the year before. I can't remember the exact dates because I didn't look it up right before doing this, so it's not fresh. But they had a new owner, and that owner, I don't even know if they ever came to the mall. It was just like somebody in Miami who was just buying up mall real estate. And on our rent checks, we had to put on this bizarre number that I can never remember. I always had to bring it up on my phone, a picture of what it was. But the management company did the best with what they had received from the owner. I don't know how much money they would receive to do things like special events to bring people in, but that was one thing that I did notice is that, when I first approached the mall about going in, they talked about how before the pandemic they were doing all these events constantly every month, and these things also for tenants and whatnot because they had the budget to do so, but post-pandemic, it seems that they just were not able to do that, and that's really unfortunate. I think that could have helped because we needed more things to bring more people into the mall, and that just unfortunately wasn't happening. And I don't know what kind of marketing they had. Now, the lady that I worked with within the management was amazing. Robin, she did some great stuff. She got me into a meeting with the local Chamber of Commerce, the county Chamber of Commerce, so I was able to put my name in front of other business owners in the area. And she also connected me with a local magazine where I was also able to get a paid promotion in that magazine once or twice. And so I don't hold anything against the mall management because they were very easy to work with, and I could tell that they were bending over backwards to help me out. But again, they probably needed more money to be able to do bigger events that would bring people into the mall, because that's what any business needs, is people to come in. And another thing that I also mentioned in that video was how movie theaters have struggled, and we always have a synergy with that. And I particularly have a synergy here in West Valley because the movie theater here has no arcade machines at all in their lobby area. Whereas in Ogden, just down the hall from my location there, was the decent arcade. They didn't have as many games as I had, but it was still there, and they were also able to keep their arcade open at hours that best suited them, aka they could open much later, like 3 in the afternoon, and they could close whenever they were done with movies or taking in customers from movies. And so do those factors apply to pretty much any other arcade out there? No. And so that's why I would say, would there be anything that I would change on the arcades are not dying video? Well, no, because it's a very specific contextual answer that applied to my arcade. Now, I will still leave it out there that I know I made mistakes. There are things that I certainly missed, and I admitted this in the other video. Was it my game selection? Was it the lighting in the arcade? Was it the fact that I would leave a lot of arcade machines off and only turn them on when there was interest? I actually did have gotten a couple of bad reviews before, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star reviews from people who just don't bother to ask or read the signs. I tell everybody who comes in, it's like, look, if there is something off, just let me know and I can turn it on. But at the Ogden location, the worst rated review we got, the person just went in there and said, oh, most of their games were broken. And again, we have signage that explains this, and I told my employees to always tell people about that, but I don't know, maybe they didn't in that particular situation. Or maybe they did and the person just didn't care. I've seen plenty of instances where I've overheard a customer come in, and even when everything's on, but there are like maybe 4 or 5 games out of the 60 or so that we have that are broken, and they'll post a review later saying most of the arcade is broken, which is nonsense because it's all a very tiny percentage of the actual arcade is broken down, but constantly people are hyperbolic and they blow up things way out of proportion as to the actual situation of what's working and what isn't. And so again, this means the closure of my location is not a canary in the coal mine saying that the entire arcade industry is doomed. I posted a video, I think it was a live stream, where I talked about how I asked other arcade operators that I know, and there's a Facebook group just for arcade operators where we get together, we discuss business and things, but I asked them, how was your 2022? And I think there was 4 or 5 comments on there. They were all said that they did great. Now on some of my YouTube videos, I've had other operators say that they had a rough 2022, so it also varies depending on what region you're at. Sometimes things in Salt Lake City, well, all the time, things in Salt Lake City are going to be very different than they are in, say, Boston or Los Angeles or Fort Lauderdale or whatever. I mean, we're a very big, diverse country. The economics are not uniform from sea to shining sea. Even though it's the same country, it's just every state, and even within a state, you'll have differences in economics. And so I think that's one thing that was at play here, because as I also mentioned in the last video, my West Valley location where I'm sitting at right now has been doing fine. No, it hasn't been blown off the charts because I'm competing with an FEC down the hall. And that's been a challenge, but it always did better than Ogden did. I mean, once in a while, Ogden would do better one day here and there, but month to month or year to year, it wasn't even close on a comparison. And so, I mean, again, would it indicate that arcades are doomed if one location fails but another one's doing just fine? Or you'll have several out there which are doing great. In fact, on that question I asked, there were some who said 2022 was the best year we ever had. But they also said Redemption was where they were enjoying it. And also in Ogden, I mentioned the Lit Arcade Bar, also known as the Lab. He told me his numbers, and I'm not allowed to share them publicly, but his games, what he made in the first month of operation, his games alone had made probably twice as much as what I would see on average over mine. And so again, just the Newgate Mall was not, unfortunately, it was not a good location to go to. I thought it would be. That's why I went there in the first place, but it wasn't. And that's often what happens in business. And as I already mentioned, tenant turnover there is high, so it wasn't just me. But again, perhaps I still made mistakes and could have done better, could still be going. But there was another factor too, just where I was having no personal time, no family time. And that also, I have to admit, drove me to say, you know what, this just isn't worth it for me to do anymore. So hopefully that context helps as to why I closed the location. But if you have other comments, then feel free to share. I do appreciate them. Thank you, John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, for adding that in there. And yeah, we'll see how the discussion continues to go. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.